Welcome back to the Triangle and Two podcast, WRL. I'm WRL's Brian Murphy, joined once again by Bryn Renner, former UNC quarterback. And last episode of this season, the 2025 season, and the game against, North Carolina's game against NC State sort of played out, I think, as most people expected. NC State just obviously dominated the game along both lines. Carolina unable to run the ball, which put a lot of pressure on Gio. And then the quarterback run, both with CJ Bailey and reserve Will Wilson, NC State's short yardage specialist. He had 4 touchdowns, and just whenever they needed it, they got 4 out of 4 on third down. Whenever NC State, Carolina couldn't get him off the field. What did you see in that game? I think it played out like most people thought it would.
Yeah, no doubt, Brian. I think it was exactly what we thought was going to happen. And I think one thing that is very, very for certain is Dave Doran's done a heck of a job of training his entire building to hate Carolina, and he pushes all the right buttons for this game. And it's something in the offseason that we definitely need to fix, including the Wake Forest and Wake Forest rivalry and Duke rivalry. I think it's just, you commend NC State for the way they played. They played a lot harder, a lot more physical. It meant more to them than it did North Carolina, and that's upsetting as far as being a alum and a former player. But I think you saw the same song and dance for Carolina that we've seen all year. Unable to run the ball effectively, forcing Gio to do things out of his comfort zone and try to make all world plays that he might not be capable of doing. And I think it's the areas of concern and that we've mentioned the last couple of weeks. And I think for me, it's the undisciplined part of certain drives as well. Like on one play, we get 3 penalties and they score. And I'm like, that's kind of what's been happening. We're losing the unsportsmanlike battle again. There's undisciplined play all over the field. And I think we've got out and coached the last 3 weeks for sure. And it hasn't been a very good season. So I think I'm looking forward to the offseason.
Yeah, just to tidy up some of that, I think 11 penalties for Carolina. Those were accepted penalties. They were called for more that weren't accepted. That makes, I think, over 10 penalties in 3 of the last 4 games. And this was one thing that Carolina was doing well, before the season started or early in the season. They weren't committing a lot of penalties. Down the stretch, been really bad. Gio left the game with an injury. No word on how severe that was, but that's the 3rd time he's left the game with an injury. 4th game, he also missed the Clemson game, so that's a 4th game that he didn't start or finish. Yeah, I mean, Dave Doran improved to 9-4 against Carolina, including the last 5 in a row. And he'll be back for a 14th season at NC State, they announced over the weekend. But, when you look at what Carolina needs to do this offseason, the portal's already started. I mean, I know it doesn't open for another month, but people are jumping in already. At least 2 wide receivers, Chris Culliver and Jason Robinson Jr. are already reportedly in the portal for Carolina. I think you're going to see massive roster turnover. National Signing Day is on Wednesday. What do you want to see out of this team in the offseason? And by all indications, let me just get this out there. Bill Belichick is going to be back. Michael Lombardi is going to be back as general manager. What can they do in year 2 to improve on a 4-8 season that I think was a disappointment for everybody? I'm not sure expectations were completely in line with this team's talent, going 10-2 or winning the ACC. But I think 4-8 is at the very low end of what this team was expected to do.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there needs to be a sense of urgency to get better really, really quick. And I think, some of the things that are very obvious, but I'd like to see a quarterback competition. I'd like to see, maybe, Max leaving that room, potentially, coming back for another year, but just kind of refining that room and maybe create some competition. I think Gio coming back and having a full year to kind of process this offense will help. But I think also going in the portal and seeing that that's a sign of a need, because he has had injuries and having a backup ready or whoever wins that race. I think the quarterback position is something we have to shore up and finding an offensive identity, Brian. I think that was kind of the common Achilles heel for us. No matter any game that we played is the ability to score the ball and get 7 points. I think that was a struggle for us this year. So I would hope that those are all sense of urgency things that we have on a to-do list of finding out who the quarterback's going to be, and finding out the offensive identity, because there was a lack of running the football and kind of having that true identity of, are we going to be a pro style, or are we going to stay in the gun and help Gio make sure he can throw a quick game? So there's just little things on the offensive side that need to be cleaned up. And I think in today's day and age of college sports, Brian, you have to understand that if you go get a guy in the portal, where does the backup land? Is he going to be a true freshman, or there is no middle ground, right? So if you go get a 6-month replacement, which we had some of those this season, you have to have somebody that's ready, that you can go get reps as far as practice is concerned, because he might be one play away. So I think that's something that Mike Lombardi and Coach Belichick need to do, is to see how they want to basically reconstruct this roster. And on defense, secondary help, I think would be something that I would look for. You're losing Will Hardy in the secondary. I'd like for us to go get a safety. I'd like for us to go get a couple corners. You're losing Thad. And then shore up the guys that you want to come back. I mean, obviously Melcart and Thompson would be great to have come back, and then you have to keep those guys on your roster and not get poached. So I think from a holistic standpoint, we have to get better and get better really quick. And also, unfortunately, there's guys in the portal that'll be looking to go other places, but we went 4-8. So who's on our roster now that can attract other people to come and play for Carolina? So I think it was a disappointing season, to say the least. And I think there's just some things, especially the undisciplined penalties, and you got to go find a leader. I think there was, you look at what NC State had with CJ Bailey. That guy is the nucleus of that team, and had a great rapport with Wilson when Will Wilson would come in and run the football. That was the nucleus of the team, and you could see it. I don't think Carolina had a very alpha leader on the defensive side or the offensive side, and that could be because of the transfer portal and not knowing who you can depend on to make plays. So I think a lot of work needs to be done. I think it's going to be one of our biggest off seasons in Carolina football history, in my opinion, and it's got to start now. So,
yeah, Jordan Shipp, I think, was probably their best offensive player. It showed up again against NC State, tried to be that leader, but and he says he will return. I think he's one of the guys you want to retain if you're Carolina. But the offensive problems, NC State scored on the first 4 drives of that game. Carolina hadn't scored 28 points against an FBS opponent all year. And so that was the ball game. You weren't going to get to 28 or 29 that it would take to win that game. My question is, what do they do at offense coordinator, and what do they do at quarterback coach? I mean, Michael Lombardi's son, Matt Lombardi, is the quarterback's coach. Hard for me. Maybe you have a better insight into it. How much Gio's development is tied to that quarterback coach, how much of it's tied to injuries, how much of it's tied to not being comfortable in the offense. But is Carolina willing to make a change at offense coordinator? Are they willing to make a change with the general manager's son as the quarterback's coach? That may give us some indication of how drastic a change they think they need to make.
Yeah. I don't have those answers. I think they have to go in and self-scout and see, what the entire body of work of the season looked like from the coach's perspective. I wish I was in the meetings every single day and could answer those questions. I never like to see anybody fired. I got fired myself, so I understand all those. And I think Freddie and Matt have done a phenomenal job with coming in, and it's only year 1, so I think there needs to be some patience as well. But also, this is a performance-based business, so I see it both ways. I think there has to be a sense of urgency to improve that position. No matter who's coaching, I think that their position needs to be improved. And if both of those guys do come back, how are we going to get better as an offense and score more points? I think that's what they want to do, and they'll have time to do that. I think this is going to be a huge offseason to kind of get new guys in there, and kind of figure out, hey, this has been our first year of experiencing what the ACC is like, and kind of getting your head around a lot of different things to make those decisions. But I do know this, on a positive note, Coach Belichick's done this for a long time, and I know he's probably just as frustrated as anybody in that building, and he's going to be determined to get it fixed.
How much of that role is the quarterback coach? Like, as a player who played quarterback at UNC and in the NFL, you coached. How important is that role of the quarterback coach versus the offense coordinator? And are they both in your ear, or, how did that experience work for you?
Yeah, just from personal experience, I do think, and I've said this before, Brian, the most important position on the coaching staff, even above head coach, is the offense coordinator. That offense coordinator needs to be in line with the quarterback, and they have to be hand in hand. And I went through a similar situation at FIU. I was not the original play caller. We actually had another guy who was calling plays, but I was the quarterback coach. So it was a three-headed monster of suggestions, and I think it can work. I think I was a quarterback coach and understood my role of kind of just the technique and the installation of plays and getting those guys on the same page and getting those reps. I think is vitally important, and I think you see what Freddie and Matt have done. I think there's different things that you can do and experiment with whoever's playing that position. But that room is so important as a whole, as we saw this year, to get it right. And I think you have another chance to do that, maybe in the transfer portal, or these freshmen can come along, and you have to reevaluate every single thing. And I think the number one thing we saw this year is if you can't score, you can't win. And we played great defense. I do commend that, but we were on the field way too long, and those guys have to do what they need to do from a business standpoint to make sure that we can score points.
Yeah, quarterback's gonna be super interesting because you have Gio, who has eligibility remaining. I think Max Johnson actually has eligibility remaining, and we'll see if he wants to continue to play. You got the two freshmen, Torrey Newkirk, clearly seems to be ahead of Bryce Baker on the depth chart, at least as of today or as of Saturday. He got into the NC State game. And then you have a big freshman recruit, 4-star coming in, who's been very public on social media about wanting to bring guys with him. And so that'll be a new dynamic that's added to it. So I think they will have to go add at least another veteran to that room at some point, because I don't think you can just hand Gio the job. It's going to have to be an open competition for that position. When you look at the road ahead, like, I wonder if Carolina, the rope on Belichick has run out, not necessarily from administration, but fans, right? They're the ones who bought all these tickets. They're the ones who bought into this hype this year. Like, what is it going to be like going into next year? Now they have an attractive home schedule, so that may help sell tickets, but you just wonder if that buzz from sponsorship, donations, ticket sales, all the things that they wanted to generate with the Belichick hire, if all that is dormant for next season.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's a very fair question as far as the expectations that were probably a little bit too lofty to start the season. And I think this is such a critical year for Carolina football coming up. It's a critical 6 months. It's a critical 12 months to get back on track and to actually see the production from what we say. And so I think in saying that is the effort needs to improve from the entire building, I would say. And look, I listen to the fans all the time, and I am one, and I'm a huge supporter of Carolina football, always will be. But you didn't see enough progress for this season going forward to each and every single game. So I think that's the biggest key. Is one thing I know about football is you have to go to work. And you really got to put your head down and be totally focused on getting the kids better and developing them. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're losing from the transfer portal and all this change is everybody wants to think that going to somewhere else or having a coach do it for you or things like that. No, it's really got to be the onus on the players to get better. And their specific progress in doing that. You can't just show up and win games and think that you have a coach that's had this career in the past. Well, the past doesn't matter. It's about the now. And the players have to understand that their sense of urgency falls on them as well. So it's this one, Brian, marriage that is like the coach can get you to a certain point, but you ultimately have to go and make plays. And I think getting the right guys in the locker room, along with fixing some of the coaching issues and developing these players, you can have that turnaround success and then go from 4-8 to 8-4 and have these certain breakthrough moments, which we have to have. And it's just going to take a lot of work. I think it's not going to happen overnight. I do applaud what we've done in recruiting, but like I said, there are 40 freshmen coming in. Like we need to get, bigger, faster kids that can play right away, essentially. And kind of we have to revamp the roster. And so it's not going to be done with talking. It's going to be done with work and spring ball and getting these guys in winter conditioning as soon as possible and having an edge that you don't want to have another 4-8 season. I think that's a big thing. And for me, that's where it starts with the mentality.
I mean, Belichick obviously had an amazing run in the pros, and because he was there so long, I think we attribute all that success to Bill. But
Yeah.
I mean, those Patriot teams had a ton of good players outside of Tom Brady. I mean, obviously Brady gets a ton of the credit, but they had, the Richard Seymours and and great running backs come through for 3 or 4 years, and Randy Moss, and I mean Joe Thuney. I'm like, they had a lot of really really good players that I think kind of get lost in the wash, and we just say Belichick and Brady. But no coach can do it without players, and I think that was one of the lessons that we learned this week. When we look at the transfer portal, I think Virginia and Duke are instructive, right? They're going to play for the ACC title this weekend. Virginia went to the portal heavy. I mean, they brought in a ton of guys, but to hear Tony Elliott talk, fit was number one, like above talent. Fit was the number one thing, and they had to fit the culture that they wanted. Duke does it the other way. They bring in guys, and then they don't leave. The value of a Duke education, or whatever resources they have to keep people. Duke does not lose players, and so then they have guys who've been in the program 4 years, 5 years, 6 years in some cases. And so you've seen it can be done different ways. Virginia did it one way, Duke's doing it a different way. But I think the main point is they're both veteran teams at this point, and they both believe in whatever it is that their coach is preaching. And Tony Elliott's big on the culture stuff. Manny Diaz is too. And Manny talked a lot about this team just didn't give up. Like, there were a lot of times in this season they lost 5 games. Maybe they don't deserve to be in the title game, but they didn't quit. They found a way to beat Carolina. They found a way to beat Wake Forest. They just kept kind of sticking with it. I wonder if there are any lessons in either of those programs for what Carolina's trying to do here.
Yeah, I completely. Those are great points, because you look at the other teams, the ACC, and that's what you have to compare it to. You look at Wake Forest, and like you said, you mentioned Duke and UVA. Like, those are the visualizations that what Carolina should be. And you have to go back and take a hard look as to why you lost those games to those guys, especially with roster. And go position by position and see who was the better player during those games. It's a fair assessment, and if you want to get paid as a college athlete, all the money that you want, you're going to have to be treated like one. That's why I've always said, like, at 19 years old, you better be ready to go compete for your job. I don't care how much they're paying for you. You better compete every single day, and that's what you have to do. And if you're Carolina, you have to look at all the teams in the state that you lost to. For the first time, we lost to every single team in the state. And that's very humbling. And you have to say, this is going to tick me off so bad, to where we're going to go make changes and go bring guys in the locker room that it matters to. And I'm not saying it didn't matter to this team, but it was evident by the scoreboard that we're lacking in certain areas. And I think that's one thing that you mentioned, is the roundabout way is leadership. I think you have to start with this leadership. You look at Chandler Morris, Mensa, and the kid from Wake Forest, the quarterback, and they took it to another level. And it was a sense of urgency that guy was the leader of the program and wanted to beat Carolina really, really bad. Well, we need to go find a guy that it really matters to, that's gonna have an edge and lead everyone around him when things are going poorly. And I just think that matters more than the talent aspect of it. And you got to get a group of guys, no matter who it is, that are talented enough, that are tired of a 4-8 season, to get in the locker room and say, this is going to change, and it starts with us.
Yeah, first time since 1989 that they lost to Wake, Duke, and State in the same season. And I think, if it were Clemson against Miami, or Florida State against Clemson in the title game, kind of throw your hands up and say, oh, these are traditional powers. It's Virginia and Duke, 2 schools that you compare yourself to academically, athletically, across the board, that are playing for the ACC title. A Virginia team that you had, if you're Carolina, you think you had that game won, that you probably should have won that game. And the Duke game, if you look at some of the analytics, Carolina controlled that game and probably should have won that game. And so if you're Carolina, you say, wait a second, these 2 teams are playing for the ACC title. That should be us, or we should be comparing ourselves to them. And I think if you're a fan, or or even in the program, I think that part is like, wait a second, Virginia and Duke, we're not talking Clemson, we're not talking Miami, we're not talking these football powers, we're talking schools that are very comparable to us, with football traditions very comparable to North Carolina's, playing for an ACC title and a possible berth at the college football playoff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's where you have to start the comparison, is the teams in the ACC. You got to really, like, you have to start preparing for your next opponents now, and seeing how we can get better roster developmentally. And, like, Brian, the schedule's harder next year. I do think that. I mean, you got Louisville, you play Clemson, you still have Duke, UVA, you have Notre Dame comes to Keenan. They're arguably on paper they're going to be underdogs in every single game, and that's going to be something that has to motivate you, regardless of who you bring on the roster. You got to bring the right type of guys that want to that challenge of taking this program to the next level, and it's got to start right away. But you're exactly right. You have to, you know, minimize your focus on those games that you lost to in-state and how they did it and how they were roster constructed.
Yeah, just to your point, they play the non-conference games are TCU in Ireland, and we saw what happened with TCU this year. East Tennessee State, which is your bye game, FCS, at UConn, which beat Duke this year, and then Notre Dame at Keenan, and then your road games in the conference are at Clemson, at Duke, at Virginia, and at Pitt. I'm not sure they'll be favored in any of those games, and then Louisville, Miami, NC State, and Syracuse at home. I mean that. That's a schedule that you could end up with one win. I mean, you could be back in the darkest days of the beginning of the Mac Brown 1.0 era against that type of schedule if you don't vastly improve in the offseason. And you're going to be bringing in a lot of new players, at least 40 freshmen / JUCO guys now, and then we'll see what they add in the portal. The one difference, and I've heard Michael Lombardi talk about this, like there is no second portal. So you get these guys once the portal closes on January 16th, all these guys should be on your team come that kickoff in Dublin, Ireland against TCU. And so maybe you have a little bit more time to build that cohesion, to build a team. But this is going to be a huge challenge for Belichick moving forward. As we get ready for this offseason, I know we've talked a ton about it. Is there one thing you're looking for from a personnel standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, even from a university standpoint that says, okay, we've learned some lessons from what happened last year?
Yeah, I think managing the noise and getting back to work is something that I would appreciate just from an alumni and a fan's perspective. I think it has to be totally focused on getting the right guys to wear the interlocking NC. And I think that starts with the quarterback competition that needs to happen. I think it starts with revamping the offensive line. We have to go get some bigger guys, and they're tough physical guys to run the football. And I think that starts with let's go get some leaders that have done it before in the transfer portal that have had success at other places. And it starts for me at the quarterback position. You have to go and create a competition at that spot, and then kind of have that position improve all the others around you. And I think that's something that you really have to go and get and very closely vet on who you get, and not just get anybody to go lead the program. It has to be somebody that can create competition with you.
Yeah, one thing I'm looking at is retention. Like we've sort of named some of the guys you want to keep. Like, are you able to keep the guys you want to keep? Now, there'll be a lot of turnover because there always is. It's college football, but if a guy didn't play the last 6 games of the year, okay, I understand. But if you're losing a Ship or a Tyler Thompson or a Melcart, if you're losing some of those interior defensive linemen who played well, or guys you really want to hold on to, that to me is an indication that maybe things aren't going the way you want it to going into this new season.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to keep a guy like Ship and make sure that he understands that you want him to be here. I think he had really good production, but I think he needs to be a leader that steps up more vocally and gets us going in the right direction. So I'm looking forward to the offseason, Brian. I think it's been a long 12 games. I've enjoyed doing this with you. I hope we can do it again next year. And I think we're definitely going to talk about the offseason moves because it's a critical one for Carolina.
Yeah, I appreciate all the time this year. Thanks to everyone out there for listening. I'm Brian Murphy with WRL. He's Bryn Renner, former UNC quarterback, and we'll catch up as points throughout the offseason. But thank you so much for doing this for me, and thanks for listening to Triangle and Two. We'll see you next week.